Today we are going to be preparing a wood substrate. We're going to take PVA glue and water and make a slurry with that. I recommend Well-Bond glue as it is a very thick glue and has a strong adhesion. You're going to mix about 3 parts water to 1 part of your PVA glue. Mix well and apply liberally to your wood substrates. For these smaller pieces, you'll see that I'm doing the front and the back. It's especially important to do those edges as well. Don't forget those. And I've gone ahead and set them in a piece of styrofoam to dry completely. Here on this larger piece, again, my 3-to-1 ratio. Making that slurry and just applying it liberally. Getting those edges. And on this one, I really don't have a place for this to sit, so after this dries, I will go on and do the back side of this piece as well. It's very important to do this process on wood substrates because of adhesion issues. Okay, so now our substrate is dry, and it's important for us to go ahead and add the hanger on the back side of the piece that we are going to be mosaicing today. So I'm just taking a measurement and marking my points where I need to add my hanger on. And you just want to make sure that the screws that are going into your substrate are not going to come through on the other side and affect your mosaic. And I usually just hold the screw up next to the edge and then go ahead and secure that hanger in place. And it's all good. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and paint our substrate. I'm just using just a white base paint. And I'm doing this because when I put my mosaics down and use my grout, I want to make sure that there is not raw wood showing through in any of the areas that have grout in them. It's just really just an assurance, just in case. It's just an extra step that I like to do. And it also, I think it also helps with the adhesion of the glue or whatever adhesive you're going to use. So I'm just going to paint this white along the front side and the edges and allow this to dry completely. This originally had like a beaded hanger on it, and I removed that. Today we will be making a mosaic address sign or address plaque, and I will be cutting most of it. I'm also going to be adding a Macintosh rose onto this plaque. I have a friend of mine, Sheila and Sharon, who own Idle Hour Glass Art. If you don't know them, please look them up. And they are working on Macintosh roses today and have challenged me and others to go ahead and make a Macintosh rose. And so glad to have the opportunity to add one to this mosaic piece of mine. Now this piece is on wood, and it is going to be an address plaque. I do not recommend wood for outdoor purposes. However, this one will be under a pretty large overhang on a porch, and so it's going to be fine. As long as it doesn't get wet, it will be fine. I apologize for being off screen here. I'm just painting the edges at this point and getting it almost finished. And I'm not trying to have perfect coverage. I just want that base layer down. Okay, and so now that this is completely dry, I have some iridescent, they're kind of blue and green with some gold iridescence on them. And I also have some beads I purchased from Hobby Lobby. They're a mauve tone, they're round, so I'll be intermixing the round beads with these green and blue mosaic stones, and I'm just taking my Wellbond glue, and this is a very simple process, and I'm creating an edge with my mosaics, and I'm going back and forth with the mosaic tiles and the bead. I apologize that they're off screen, but you'll get a good glance of those. I'm just putting everything on a tray. It keeps my tesserae available and nice and neat and not just rolling all over the place. So these tiles were already pre-cut, and as the beads were already created and they were on a strand I purchased from Hobby Lobby. And so this is a very quick process right here, and I'm just going around with a brush that I've committed for the Wellbond glue and painting that glue on the surface along the edge and adding my stones in place. You want to make sure that there's very good contact with that glue, so slide it in place and then press down and make sure you've got a nice even border. They will slip around until the glue dries, and so you want to make sure that you continually go back and look and make sure that all of your pieces are still lined up. Now the mosaic tiles that I'm currently using, I believe I got from Amazon. And as I said earlier, the beads were from Hobby Lobby. But you can use what you have here. For something like this, it really helps to have a margin of, you know, just something to margin out your mosaic. Some consistency. And you can see this is going pretty quickly. I don't go too far with the glue because it does dry fairly quickly. I just lay probably about 1 inch of it down, and then I just add 2 or 3 beads to that. Beads and tiles, I should say. Here I'm actually putting more of those beads onto my plate. And you could totally do a mosaic using, you know, just these objects. You don't have to necessarily go into cutting your own glass, but this is being able to cut your own glass with mosaics opens up a whole new world for you to create. And even though this is a very small project, buying tiles that are pre-cut can get costly and add to the cost of your project. So having the option of pre-cutting your glass in mosaics or your ceramics in mosaics will help in your cost savings some. Now I'm not going to go completely around my oval here. I'm going to leave an opening for my Macintosh rose. And here you'll see I skipped along on this end of things. I went ahead and cut some of my pieces. I used some of these. These were pre-purchased petals, and I'm going to use my glass nippers and put the blade right in the center and cut that that stained glass petal in half and form a smaller petal for my rose. And so that's essentially how I came about making my Macintosh rose over to that edge there. I also took some of those larger black tiles you'll see on my paper towel there, and I used that to cut. I cut that down into pieces that I hand formed my numbers into. And these are just laid down. So here you'll see me with one of the black pieces of tile. It's a rather thick piece, and I have a couple sets of glass nippers here, some that open wider than others, that I enjoy using. So my tessera, or the pieces that I'm using here, are not going to be the same size. So this adds a level of complication when you're starting to grout, when your tessera is at different heights. But in this situation, I decided that I like the aesthetic of the very random numbers rather than having something that's very very clean and generic looking. I wanted to just kind of play around and form my own. You certainly can do it any way that you wish to. So I'm just playing, and nothing except for that outside border is glued down at this time. I have some round beads, but I think I've decided that they're a little bit big for this, so I'm not going to use them. And I'm just using a lid, just a plastic lid, and on that I am going to lay my Well Bond glue, full strength. And I'm just bringing over some of my tools. It's like a pair of good tweezers, maybe one or two pairs. And then there's some paddles with two different ends. And these just kind of help me work with all of the pieces. So I've just laid things out temporarily, and I am going to pick everything up and glue it down. And so I'm starting with my number 1 because that's the center, and I want to keep everything centered to my piece. And starting with that number kind of helps me to keep my other numbers in line. And everything is done by hand here. So I decide to cut one more piece. Make sure that you're wearing eye protection when you're cutting. You do not want to get a sliver of glass in your eyes. That's could be a real problem. Making the 0 was probably my biggest issue, just because of the height of it, and I had some of the black tiles, the large thick black tiles that were more petal shaped, and so what I did was I cut them like I cut my rose petals, and just put my nippers in the center of the tile and cut it, and it gave me some tiles that had more of a rounded edge to it, and I'm just placing them together randomly and forming my number. And this process will take you quite a bit of time, stopping and cutting and placing. It's a process, and it's going to take you quite a bit of time. And oftentimes we have to do these in stages just because of the amount of work that goes into doing these. And so at times I do need to use my tweezers to get in and pick pieces up and work with the glass. I'm just taking the pieces up and putting the bottom side into the glue and making sure I've got a good amount of glue on that bottom side, pressing it down onto my substrate, making sure that the complete piece of it is making contact with the substrate. One of the challenging parts here is that you are going to get glue on your fingers, and you are using your fingers to place these pieces down, and once the glue becomes tacky on your fingers, as you can see here, I'm having a little bit of a struggle. It likes to pull back up again. It likes to stick to your fingers, and so this is why using your tweezers can come in handy. You know, it's not going to stop you from getting glue on your fingers, but it will slow that down some. And I'm just going back and making sure everything is making contact with the substrate. And you can see that the way I formed my rose is that part of it is coming into my number 8, and the other part is filling in where I left that opening when I was putting the border on. You can see there is another row of tiles that I put down. At this point, they still are not glued down, and I decide to add another row in between, another layer of tiles in between the margin and those. I'm just gluing my rows down now. And I do have this process going on hyperlapse, as you can see. Just using my tools to make sure that the tiles, the glass that I'm using is completely put down, and touching that surface. And if not, like you saw there, I went ahead and added more glue to that one piece. And there's still just a little bit of a gap there, but I'm going to go in and add those tiles, as I was telling you about earlier, to it. So I had used some, it's kind of a pinkish salmon-y color for the rose, and some green. All of them are iridescent, just to give a little difference and to the piece, a little bit of shine. Again, still checking to make sure that each of the pieces are adhered down to my substrate well, and that they are fixed in the shape that I want them to be. And I'm just wiping off the glass pieces and making sure there's no glue on top of them. And any additional glue that has spilled out beyond my tile, I'm just cleaning up a little bit. You don't want to add anything real wet here, because remember, our glue is water soluble, and you're going to keep it from drying, basically. We don't want that. We need our glue to completely dry. All right, I'm on probably several hours later, and here I have picked some colored tiles and some millefiori to fill in around the numbers. I went ahead and also put in that extra row of tiles and glued down the ones that were on there. So I've got this peachy pink colored tiles that we're going to be using, and I got my glass cutters here, and I've got it right on the line where I want to cut, and again right on the line where I want to cut, and forming it so that it will fit into the mosaic. Sometimes it might take 1 or 2 cuts, and other times it takes using your nippers to kind of, make little bites into the glass in order for it to fit the area. Again, please make sure that you've got on proper safety gear when you're doing this process, because glass will fly everywhere. And this was pretty tricky. My numbers were close together, and this piece is small enough where it could be a little more complicated to get the right shapes and sizes in place. But I'll go ahead and continue building in these this pinkish background that we're laying down here. Now I decided on this color because I felt that it went well with the color of the rose, and I needed somewhat of a neutral for the center, and this was the closest thing I really had on hand. What I'm using is vitreous glass here. And they come with a smoother side, and then they have a side that is quite textured, and you always want that textured side to go down. And this is a good reason why you want a thicker PVA glue or something even stronger. just because you need to get in between the grooves on the back side of it when you're laying down your glue. And the Millefiori, I didn't want that really getting lost in the grout, and so I decided to glue a few pieces on the glass tile, and that way they would kind of rise above the grout and show up better. So it's a little bit different than what I would normally do, but with these very large numbers and the height difference, I felt like they needed more height themselves so they didn't get swallowed up with the grout. Now, as I lay these pink tiles down, oftentimes I'm having to lay them in kind of awkward areas, and so I just take and use a pen, set a tile down, I use a pen to make some marks with, and then I cut those marks until I get a piece that fits. Okay, so I've gotten all of my background colors in. I'm just going in and filling in any extra areas that I feel like can use a piece of tile or a piece of glass, and just cleaning up as I go. Okay, so I've let that all dry, and it's more than likely the next day here. And I thought my video was working, and it did not. I wanted you guys to see me mix the grout, but it's very self-explanatory. I mixed up 2 colors of grout. I used white grout, and I divided it, and I added a little bit of a portrait pink paint to one of the cups of grout that I had just mixed, and mixed that really well together, and in and around all of my numbers and the background color, as well as around the rose, I did a pink grout. And around the border, the blue-green borders, I left that grout white. And you can do that. It takes this was a tough piece to grout because it has different layers to the tessera, and you have to decide where you want to pull and clean up your grout from the higher areas. And so anyways, I'm just taking a dry paper towel here and wiping back some of this wet grout. You can see I still have one of my gloves on from grouting, and I've taken my other glove off. I'm just taking this dry paper towel and trying to get all of the extra grout basically off the stones. And this is just a first process, and then I will leave it alone and let it completely dry. It's not going to be perfect. You're not trying to get all of the extra grout off of your project. You're just trying to get the initial bit of it off. And I'm just using a dry paper towel. Some people like to use the wet method, and I use it every once in a while, which is just using a very, very damp sponge. You want to make sure that your sponge is wrung completely out, and then just wiping it over with that. But either one is fine. Either one works. You just have to make sure you don't add extra water to the grout, because it won't dry, it won't cure properly. So there it is, it's grouted, and I just have to let it dry. Essentially, you just mix it up and then take your hands and rub it on, making sure that it gets into all of the cracks and crevices. I'm just taking a tool here and going in while the grout is still wet, and cleaning up around some of these areas that I know I'm going to wind up having to clean up later once the grout has hardened. And sometimes it's better, for me anyways, to go in ahead of that and get some of the cleaning up without pulling out too much grout, because it's just counterintuitive to do that. It takes some time. This is a process, and it takes a lot of time to get cleaned up with mosaics. So here you will see me just clean up. And I'm just going to keep going about doing this and wait for it to completely dry. And then we'll do a final cleanup. And here is the final look of my project. This is a home address sign, and I think it turned out pretty well. I hope that you've enjoyed it and learned something. Look for more videos like this coming in the near future.